Hey guys, hope you are all well. I'm reading the June 15, 1992 Observer newsletter tonight. Let's dive in. June 15, 1992 Observer newsletter. SummerSlam Wembley build, more with Watson WCW, WWF pay-per-view and more. By Observer staff. June 15, 1992. A lot more information has been released regarding the WWF SummerSlam pay-per-view show on August 29 from Wembley Stadium in London. The biggest items from this past week are that the lineup is set and neither Hulk Hogan nor Ric Flair will be wrestling on the card and that the event will be closed-circuited throughout Europe. The lineup that was being advertised on European television over this past weekend consisted of all of the current marriages that are playing in the United States: Randy Savage vs. Flair for the WWF title, Ultimate Warrior vs. Papa Shango, Bret Hart vs. Shawn Michaels for the Intercontinental title, Money Incorporated, Ted DiBiase and IRS vs. Natural Disasters for the WWF Tag Team titles, Legion of Doom vs. Beverly Brothers, Sergeant Slaughter vs. the Mountie, Nasty Boys vs. High Energy, Owen Hart and Coco Ware, and Undertaker vs. Berserker. However, as we figured when the top matches were announced on European television more than a week ago, this is actually a bogus lineup and angles will be taking place to change the card, although one would assume many of these announced matches will be taking place. Titan held a press conference in London on Tuesday and announced the top 4 matches on the show, and this is the real lineup since pay-per-view advertising in the US was sent out confirming this, as being Savage vs. Warrior for the WWF title, Hart vs. British Bulldog for the Intercontinental title, Money Incorporated vs. Legion of Doom for the WWF Tag Team titles and Undertaker vs. Kimala. Since British Bulldog is the most popular of all the WWF wrestlers in Europe, I'd say the odds of a title switch there are excellent. Neither Hogan nor Flair will wrestle on the show. Flair is scheduled to be on the show doing an interview, while Hogan won't be on the show, with the word being that he won't return until early 1993. Because the show is being geared toward the European market rather than the US market, Flair not working isn't as significant since his name isn't that big in Europe to begin with. It'll be the first time the WWF has attempted to do a major pay-per-view without Hogan headlining. The expectation is that it will be the lowest buy rate of any major WWF pay-per-view show ever. One official projected the buy rate as low as 1.0%, with a $27.50 list price, although 1.5 sounds more realistic since the previous 3 SummerSlams have done approximately a 4.8 for the Zeus match, 3.7, Hogan Earthquake, and 2.7, Savage Elizabeth Wedding. The WWF's interest level in the US is at its lowest point since national expansion, combined with no Hogan and adding in that the show is coming on the heels of the Olympic Games going on pay-per-view, which I think will only have a slight effect, adds up to a not very promising mix. Titan's revenue from the event is still being projected to top WrestleMania because the live gate is scaled for an all-time record and the company expects to do millions of dollars from the closed-circuit sites in Europe. Stan Hansen beat Toshiaki Kawada to retain the Triple Crown Friday night at Tokyo's Budokan Hall before a sellout 16,300 fans, which ties All Japan's indoor attendance record set at the March Budokan show. At the card they announced the return to Budokan is August 22nd, and they began selling tickets for the next show at the card, and within 1 hour after the card was over, approximately half the tickets for the next card had been sold, which sounds like some kind of a record. All ringside seats and the entire bottom deck of the 3-decked building were sold out that evening, before any of the matches or even names of the foreign talent that will be appearing for the show have been announced. Speaking of sellouts, the WBF Championship pay-per-view takes place Saturday night from the Terrace Theater in Long Beach. The bodybuilding show, which has been pushed to death on the WWF wrestling shows, stiffed as far as live sales, despite announcers on television claiming the event has been sold out for some time. As of this past Thursday, there were still balcony seats remaining for the live event in a building that only holds 2,700. While no official figures have been released, we are told that about 2/3 of the tickets that are out were freebies. With months and months of heavy hype on wrestling and bodybuilding television shows and posters being sent to gyms everywhere and it being plugged even in Northern California and Nevada on event centers like it was a local event, let alone Southern California, reportedly less than 1,000 tickets were sold. The attempt to plug it as a hot ticket was a last-ditch effort to create some momentum to get people to purchase the event of pay-per-view, where it will almost surely stiff as well. Titan has pulled some rabbits out of its hat at the last minute before, but it doesn't look like there's a rabbit in sight this time. Expect a wrestling angle with Lex Luger to take place at some point during the show. Speaking of major shows, WCW has booked the Charlotte Baseball Stadium, 30,000 capacity, for a Great American Bash card on July 18th. As many of you will remember, The first bash ever back in 1985 drew 27,000 to the same building, headlined by Ric Flair vs. Nikita Koloff, and subsequent bashes drew in excess of 15,000. The lineup for the show has Sting vs. Big Van Vader for the WCW title, Rick Rude vs. Nikita Koloff, Rick Steamboat vs. Cactus Jack. One of these two matches will be for the U.S. title, Rick and Scott Steiner vs. Terry Gordy and Steve Williams for the WCW Tag Team title, Steve Austin vs. Barry Windham for the WCW television title, Dustin Rhodes vs. Greg Valentine, Johnny B. Bad vs. TaylorMade Man, and Bobby Eaton vs. Larry Zbyszko, plus a fireworks show and a musical concert with the Fabulous Freebirds. You were expecting Garth Brooks. WCW also has a similar lineup for an outdoor show on July 11th at the Richmond Braves baseball stadium. Most of the major talk over the past week involves the new WCW rules as established by Bill Watts, both in a memo to the wrestlers about 2 weeks ago and in a meeting Monday night at Center Stage before the television taping. We have one correction to make: shows what happens when people don't pay close attention in class. From what was reported here last week, the official company policy on blood is that Watts is going to use blood. However, because of the higher-ups being afraid of a lawsuit by a wrestler unwilling to cut themselves and taking the company to court if they either lost their spot or their job over it, and in that case, the wrestler would almost surely win, Watts is unable to order anyone to cut. However, he will suggest it when he feels it is useful for the product, but the wrestler has the option to turn down the request and doesn't have to give a reason, and no punishment in terms of a lesson push will result in turning down the request. There are wrestlers who believe that turning down the request is akin to having the man with the pencil erase you from main event consideration, but it was clearly stated as blading would be up to the discretion of the wrestler. Watts said he didn't believe HIV could be spread from a head cut, and admittedly there isn't one case on record of HIV being spread during a bloody wrestling match. The potential of contracting AIDS has been the main argument for banning blading. However, several doctors who are experts in the field of the spreading of the HIV have felt pro wrestlers are in the highest risk category of almost any athletes because of adding the factor of wrestlers bleeding all over one another with the prevalence of injecting drugs with needles, the lifestyle on the row, which wrestlers are no different than many other popular sports and entertainment performers, and the disease has already started to hit both. While the majority of Watts' new rules have been pretty well accepted as steps in a positive direction, and in some cases, as necessary, as expected, there is some dispute over the rationale for removing the mats from the ring area in states where they aren't mandated. Apparently, Watts tried to discourage using chops to the chest a la Ric Flair, feeling that they expose the business in favor of more punches. This has been cause for some dispute since the stiff chops a la Flair have become very popular, and in some ways the loud sound effects of a stiff chop makes things seem more realistic than punches with no sound effects. Without question, however, the most controversial new rule is the banning of all moves from the top rope. It eliminates accepted and popular maneuvers from the group's top performers: Sting, Rick Steiner, Rick Steamboat, Great Muta, Jushin Liger, Brian Pillman, Tom Zenk, Johnny B. Bad. And unlike elimination of using the ring post and low blows, will hurt match quality. In fact, what many looked forward to and what was specifically booked to be a match of the year caliber bout on June 16 in Charleston, South Carolina with Pillman and Liger versus Chris Benoit and Biff Wellington, while not completely ruined by the new rule, is certainly going to be hampered greatly. If there is a method to this apparent madness, and that is trying to sell completely realistic-looking wrestling all of the WWF-type organizations in Japan, maybe this is a step in legitimizing the product. It's highly unlikely such a style would make it in this country, and there is no chance it would without a very charismatic performer to popularize the style and a period of at least 2 extremely lean years to educate fans to submissions and to accept realistic-looking matches. Since neither is going to happen, it's something of a moot point that some moves that are universally popular aren't actually legitimate. Trying to rationalize that top rope moves wouldn't be used in a legitimate street fight is ridiculous, because virtually nothing used in a pro ring would be used. I've yet to hear anything close to a reason that holds any water for the rule other than it was a rule in the past. But those who have said it would be the equivalent of the NBA banning the dunk and three-point shot because when Bob Cousy played, neither existed, are, unfortunately, pretty close to the mark on this one. Since this change has been almost universally criticized, I expect there is a pretty decent chance it will be done away with in a few months. Watts made statements in the meeting about steroids, as reported here previously, that if TBS is against them, that guys won't be allowed to use them. After nearly 1 full year of pro wrestling being engulfed in a steroid problem, a few lessons should have been learned if anyone was paying attention. Doing nothing inherently is condoning steroid use because of the competitive advantages steroids give wrestlers in bolstering their physique. Promotions from the mid-'80s to the present did nothing. Steroids were plentiful because it helped guys get over, and those who didn't want to use them often still did because they had to do something to keep pace with those who did. One can argue that things should then be left alone, but that is ignoring that steroids are a felony, and doing nothing about it inherently means the organization is encouraging its athletes to commit felonies to keep up competitively with the competition, not to mention that WCW television is inundated with anti-steroid PSA. Testing is not the answer because tests are beatable despite what those who administer the test want you to believe. 3. Not testing is even less of the answer, because then nobody takes the program seriously. Steroids are a huge issue with WCW because they have wrestlers doing specific anti-steroid interviews on their television show, whereas the WWF only has wrestlers in their magazine taking the more vague say no to drugs of all kinds. Also, while the WWF has not eliminated usage of muscle-building drugs no matter what may be publicly claimed, use has decreased, and while some wrestlers who could literally be called chemical-free causoids may still be using some stuff, they've clearly cut down on quantity, which at least has lowered the standard somewhat and is better for the health of everyone overall. While the WWF could take a real approach instead of the fake approach by not pushing, or not hiring in the first place, the freaks built on a foundation of sauce, to say testing has been a complete failure wouldn't be fair either. While WWF has had a 6-month head start in regard to its initial announcement, it has also made more progress than WCW in regards to this subject, even though it has yet to invoke a serious plan and instead is using drug testing as something of a very expensive PR ca. On the other hand, after Kip Fry first implemented his program, it did appear use in WCW had decreased, at least among certain wrestlers. But it did nothing to dissuade the hardcore users. Judging from recent television and talking with various wrestlers, it is back up as high as ever right now because the hardcore users have been able to get away unabated, and have created the standard, and those who can take it or leave it have to be able to stand next to them. With no testing at all, there is no deterrence built in. But implementing policies that haven't worked anywhere else isn't the answer if one is trying to address the problem, and not just implement a PR con. This is not saying WCW should ban steroid use or have a policy. Just to say that the responsibility of management in a wrestling company is to either condone use, doing nothing and saying you aren't encouraging use is still condoning use, or condemn it, which means use is eliminated, which in some cases means certain very charismatic wrestlers may have to be punished in some form because other methods have proven to be ineffective. Superstar Billy Graham, who was in the news most of the early part of this year, underwent yet another hip operation on Sunday. Graham had been scheduled for a third operation on his bad hip, which deteriorated from avascular necrosis, which he blamed on his 20-year use of steroids, later this month. The hip had dislocated several times since the second operation. This latest operation came about 2 weeks earlier than planned because the hip went out again just as Graham was getting ready to eat his birthday cake Sunday. The doctors had to redo the entire hip since the glute muscles that were supposed to be supporting the artificial hip had torn and nothing was holding it in place, and the hip moved to the butt. No word on how the operation went other than Graham lost a considerable amount of blood. However, he had been giving blood on a regular basis leading up to the operation because of what happened in the previous operation. Graham is expected to be in traction for at least a week and in a brace for the remainder of the summer and much of the fall. The Mexican AAA promotion did take over the Galavision Sunday time slot, which airs on cable in much of the United States, this past Sunday. There is some question what the future will bring as far as the Sunday slot, with speculation rampant at press time that starting next week, both AAA and EMLL will have the big Friday night shows airing in the US 9 days later. Speculation is that both groups, which had been running 2-hour television shows, will cut back to 90 minutes and there will be a 3-hour Sunday night wrestling block on Galavision. We should know for certain by next week. The AAA is certainly more expansion-minded than EMLL was, with it signing a talent exchange agreement with FMW, which aces out Benjamin Mora's WWA in Baja California for the Lucha Group working with FMW, and serious talks about running regular cards at the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles starting in late July. The working agreement with FMW also means that AAA wrestlers like Elio Del Santo, who signed with AAA this past week, Pero Aguayo, Volador, Misterioso, Canelo Casas, etc. will no longer tour Japan for Universal, as they had in the past, and will switch to FMW. FMW and AAA do have an outdoor show set on July 4th in Los Angeles at the East Los Angeles City College Football Stadium, tentatively headlined by Atsushi Onita vs. Conan in an explosive barbed wire match. Most expect that AAA's headliners like Conan, Pero Aguayo, Octagon and Elio Del Santo, who officially signed with AAA on Wednesday, will be featured on the Los Angeles shows, and I believe the Mexican Midgets debut on the July 4th card. It'll be interesting to see if AAA runs localized inserts and interviews for the Los Angeles shows on the satellite show that airs on CH22 in Los Angeles. While it makes sense, that doesn't mean it will happen. The lucha shows thus far have been plugged mainly through advertising in Spanish newspapers and on Spanish radio. Being at the 6-month point of the year, it's as good a time as any to give my own picks for the best of this past year. Wrestler of the Year, there is nobody who stands out here. In fact, there is nobody I would call a legitimate candidate based on standards set in the past. Given that, my pick would be Toshiaki Kawada of All Japan, because he's been in more great matches than anyone else, and has been the most responsible for those matches as anyone. He is important to his promotion, which is on fire, even though he isn't the top guy. There are guys as important to their promotion, but none who combine it with as many high-quality matches. Most outstanding wrestler, Manami Toyota. As written here last week, there is no other choice. She's wrestling the style of the year 2000, which is a few years ahead of everyone else. Best babyface, with Hulk Hogan on the sidelines probably for the rest of the year. This category is left wide open. Atsushi Onita fits the bill as well as anyone when it comes to both drawing heat and the ability to pack buildings. Rick Steamboat has played the perfect babyface role, but it's in a situation where the promotion lacked direction, so the results weren't there. Sting's drawing power is questionable, and Ultimate Warrior has been a major disappointment. Mitsuharu Misawa is probably as close a rival to Onita as there is. Best heel, Rick Rude. Almost by default, but to his credit he has been tremendous both in and out of the ring. Feud of the year, there are still no better matches than Misawa's team versus Surita's team, and they still usually draw. It's also beginning its third year and at times is even beginning to show some staleness. Steamboat vs. Rude has been strong everywhere but at the box office, but it's been the closest thing to a great U.S. feud. While some feuds in Mexico have drawn better, none have really seemed to make a lasting impact. For the smaller promotions, Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett vs. the Moondogs deserve serious consideration because it carried the smaller territories at a time when all the rest of the smaller territories were dying. Tag Team of the Year, totally up in the air without a standout candidate. Last year's winners, Mitsuharu Misawa and Toshiaki Kawada, haven't worked consistently as a duo. Keiji Muto and Hiroshi Hashi are the two best individual workers that have combined, but again I'm not sure they've teamed consistently enough to be considered. The Steiners and Arnold Anderson and Bobby Eaton have teamed together enough, but their consistent match quality isn't at the level of the Japanese teams. Maybe Steve Williams and Terry Gordy, throwing everything together, are the closest to both having the most talent, teaming together consistently, and having the great matches. Best on interviews, Ric Flair was really great leading up to WrestleMania, although for the year I'd have to pick Paul E. Dangerously and Arnold Anderson as the best I've seen. From what little I've seen of Smoky Mountain, Jim Cornette would be right there, and he definitely does the best shoot interviews around. Best technical wrestler, Manami Toyota has invented so many new moves and executes them flawlessly. Barring an injury, this is her year. Bruiser Brody Memorial Award, last year's winner, Cactus Jack, hasn't been given the opportunity this year as a prelim wrestler, although he does have the chance on June 20th. I describe what Stan Hansen, who looks the best he has in years of late, and Toshiaki Kawada do as a combination of tough wrestling with stiff brawling, and they'd head my list. Best flying wrestler, there are many with some exceptional moves, but in putting it together in a package where the matches are usually of top caliber and being consistently at the top level, and Jushin Liger is the standout by a sizable margin. Best promotion, even though nobody has better matches than All Japan Women, it's the All Japan Men that have combined the best work in the ring with the most consistent success at the gate. But if you're talking about having the best live shows, All Japan Women are the best there is. Best television show, All Japan Pro Wrestling. The action and television ratings speak for itself. Match of the year, it's hard to pick just one after reviewing the list in last week's Observer, but either Manami Toyota vs. Kyoko Inoue on April 25th or Toyota and Toshio Yamada vs. Suzuka Minami and Yumiko Hata on March 4th stand out. Manager of the year, Paul E. Dangerously. Paul Bearer seems almost non-existent as a face, so sensational Sherry is the only one close, and as good as her ring work is, she can't compare on interviews. Best announcer, Jim Ross has been really strong on the big shows, and since the ones who are apparently in his league speak in a different language, I can't pick anyone else. AAA. Octagon retained the Mexican middleweight title, beating chief rival Fuerza Guerrera 2 out of 3 falls on May 29th in Octagon's hometown of Jalapa. Originally Guerrera was going to win the title, but the finish was changed because they wanted to do the title change on television instead. Some of the midgets that work for this group are going to tour Puerto Rico. Aside from Santo, also having signed this week are Kendo Star, younger brother of Kendo from Japan fame Leon Chino, who worked as Katana in UWA and for New Japan in recent months, and Ricky Boy, who worked the opener on the WCW Phoenix pay-per-view show last year, who will probably get a new gimmick. Then came a major angle as Brazo de Oro came to the ring for his match, and Chicana, who had not left the ring from the previous match, jumped him and beat him senseless. Brazo de Oro's scheduled tag partners for the match, Negro Casas and Pierroth Jr., just stood by and did nothing. They ran the scheduled match anyway with Brazo Oro and Casas and Pierroth versus Lizmark and Dandy and Faraon. Lizmark's team won the first fall, but in the second fall Pierroth also turned on Brazo de Oro and the faces saved him. Dandy pinned Casas to win the second fall, and after Casas and Pierroth again blamed Brazo de Oro and attack him again until the faces once again save him. 3¼ stars. Main event saw Atlantis and Canadian Vampire Casanova and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. beat the new Infernales, Pirata Morgan and Satanico and MS1, when Jalisco pinned Morgan in the third fall even though Morgan got his foot on the rope. 3 stars. The dark match on the card was a women's battle royal. They've got another battle royal coming up on June 12th, and the 2 winners will meet to determine the first champion on June 19th at Arena Mexico. Women entered are Lola Gonzalez, Xochitl Hamada, Lady Apache, Zulima, Kaoru Maida, Louisiana, Sirenita, Atenas, Selena, Bull Nakano, Martha Villalobos, Pantera Serena, Maria del Angel, Neftali, Wendy Louisiana Guerrero Cupura, and La Diabolica. I expect it'll wind up with Gonzalez versus Nakano and Nakano winning. It appears Los Brazos and Brazo de Plata is apparently already back in action after suffering his second heart attack this year 2 weeks ago, are now faces after the attack by Chicana, as the next day at Arena Pista Revolucion in Mexico City they headlined against Chicana and Charles and Casas, although on June 7th back at Arena Mexico they were on the heel side against Lizmark and Love Machi, Art Bar, and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. Los Brazos are pretty much tweeners anyway. Atlantis made his 33rd successful defense on his NWA middleweight title, beating La Fiera on May 30th in Puebla. UWA. May 31st at El Torreo in Naucalpan saw Canek and Dr. Wagner Jr. and the Killer beat El Signo and Black Scorpio, Charles Skaggs, and Gigante Warrior, Butch Masters, in a battle of heel trios when Canek pinned Scorpion clean in the third fall. In the final El Torreo match for both El Hijo del Santo and longtime rival Negro Casas, Santo and Eddie Guerrero and Villano Trace beat Casas and the Headhunters when Casas submitted in the third fall. The newspapers were heavily playing up Santo teaming with Guerrero since their fathers, El Santo and Gory Guerrero, were the famous tag team in the history of Mexican wrestling. Also Miguelito Perez and Ricky Santana and Cajos beat Enrique Vieira and Villano 4 and Villano 5, El Engendro and Babyface and Shu El Guerrero Drew Villano and El Psicodelico and El Coloso and Lasser and Celestial and Ninja Sasuke, Masa Michinoku, beat Cassandro and Momotar, Monkey Magic Wakita and Okano Takigaki Gantetsu from Universal in Japan. Transformer, who is now Kendo with AAA, kept his mask, beating Zeus in a mask versus mask match on May 28 in Mexico City. Zeus turned out to be Andres Solano, who used to work as Baby Richard in EMLL. Los Cowboys, Silver King and El Texano, current tag champs for this group, have changed their ring name to Los Efectivos. They kept the belts on May 28 in Calaya, beating the Headhunters. Los Cowboys will feud with the Can-Am Express when the Express returns from Japan. Most of the main events this past week have had Canek captain a trio against the Puerto Rican trio, Perez and Santana and Warrior, including June 7th at El Torreo where Canek teamed with Rambo and Wagner. Santo and Casas' final appearance for this promotion was June 4th in Toluca with Santo and Gran Hamada versus Wagner and Casas. Eddie Guerrero is in full-time as a face. June 10th in Celaya has El Hijo del Diablo putting up his mask against the hair of Replanter. El Signo and Negro Navarro are in Guatemala. After that they are headed to Europe along with Rambo, Carlos Plata and Chacho Herides, of AAA. Rambo works as Sergeant Mendieta in Europe because they already have a Rambo who is the champ for Otto Juan's CWA. May 29th in Netzahual Coyote saw Vieira and Hamada and Villano Trace beat Black Scorpio and Bam Bam Bigelow and Killer 1 and 1/2 star. Villanos 4 and V beat Wagner and Espanto Jr. 1 and 1/2 star, and Los Efectivos, Silver King and El Texano beat Casas and Engendro 3 stars. All Japan. The next tour will be July 4th to July 31st with Stan Hansen, Johnny Ace, Joel Deaton, Billy Black, Sonny Beach, The Patriot Del Wilkes, Barry Horowitz, Abdullah the Butcher, Giant Kimalatu, Ben Peacock, and the Destroyer, Dick Bayer, who celebrates his 62nd birthday on this tour. Kenta Kobashi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi won the All-Asian Tag Team titles from Dan Crawford and Doug Furness on May 25th in Miyagi in a match said to be one of the greatest tag team matches ever held. Now doesn't that set expectations at an unrealistic level? Finish had Kobashi pin Crawford with a moonsault in 22:11. Complete results of June 5th at Budokan Hall, which was the group's final card for 4 weeks, saw Hansen pin Toshiaki Kawada in 21-18 with a lariat to keep the Triple Crown. Jumbo Tsuruta and Akira Tao retained the PWF World Tag Team titles, beating Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi in 27-12 when Tao pinned Kobashi. Steve Williams and Terry Gordy, working with a legit broken nose, and Richard Slinger beat Andre the Giant and Johnny Smith, who broke a bone in his leg the previous night, and Johnny Ace when Gordy powerbombed Smith. Crawford and Furnace beat Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton. Patriot pinned Jackie Fulton. Yoshinari Ogawa and Mighty Inoue beat Dean Malenko and Ricky Nelson. Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Mitsuo Momota beat Satoru Asako and Masao Inoue, and Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura, and rookie Ryuma Izumida beat the Wild Bunch, Masafuchi and Motoshi Okuma and Haruka Eigen. The Hansen-Kawada match made the front page of Tokyo Sports on Saturday morning with two large color photos, one of which showed the two shaking hands in the dressing room after the match. Kawada had to be helped out after the match, and they did a gimmick where he had to be hospitalized from Hansen's lariat. Baba also announced that since Tao pinned Kobashi in the tag title match, that Tao would get the next shot at Hansen's Triple Crown, which is why Tao, not Tsuruta, is scoring the majority of pins in the tag matches. June 4th in Takasaki drew 2,700 as Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi beat Tsuruta and Tao and Ogawa in 24-51 when Misawa pinned Ogawa. Gordy and Williams and Slinger beat Smith and Ace and Hansen when Williams stampeded Smith. Prophet and Furnace beat Malenko and Patria. Kikuchi pinned Nelson. Baba and Andre and Kimura beat Wild Bunch. Fantastics, Jackie and Bobby Fulton, beat Inoue and Izumida, and Rogers pinned Asako. June 3rd in Niigata drew a sellout 3,600 as Tsuruta and Tao beat Hansen and Ace when Jumbo pinned Ace with the back suplex. Misawa and Kawada and Kikuchi beat Williams and Gordy and Slinger when Kikuchi pinned Slinger in 22-49. Kobashi pinned Patria. Crawford and Furnace beat Malenko and Rogers. Andre and Baba and Kimura beat Wild Bunch and Ogawa, and Mighty Inoue beat Nelson and Smith. June 2nd in Fukushima drew a sellout 3,850 as Tsuruta and Tao and Fuchi beat Misawa and Kobashi and Kikuchi in 25-52 when Tao pinned Kikuchi. Hansen and Ace and Patriot beat Gordy and Williams and Slinger when Ace pinned Slinger in 16-23. Kawada pinned Nelson. Andre and Mighty Inoue and Ogawa beat Fantastics and Smith. Baba and Kimura beat Okuma and Eigen, and Crawford and Furnace beat Malenko and Rogers. June 1st in Tochigi drew a sellout 2,300 as Hansen and Ace and Jackie Fulton beat Tsuruta and Tao and Ogawa. Williams and Gordy and Slinger beat Misawa and Kawada and Kikuchi when Williams pinned Kikuchi. Kobashi pinned Smith. Crawford and Furnace beat Patriot and Nelson, and Baba and Andre and Kimura beat Wild Bun. May 30th in Hamamatsu drew a sellout 6,000 for television tapings as Kawada and Kobashi beat Hansen and Ace when Kawada made Ace submit. Fuchi kept the PWF Junior title, making Rogers submit to a half crab. Gordy and Williams and Slinger beat Crawford and Furnace and Malenko. Tsuruta and Tao beat Misawa and Kikuchi. Andre and Mighty Inoue and Ogawa beat Patriot and Fantastics, and Smith pinned Izumida. May 29th in Nara drew a sellout 2,050 as Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi beat Tsuruta and Tao and Ogawa. Gordy and Williams beat Patriot and Jackie Fulton. Crawford and Furnace beat Slinger and Smith. Baba and Kimura and Izumida beat Wild Bunch in 26-48. You read that right? Can you imagine watching it? Kikuchi pinned Nelson. Rogers and Bobby Fulton beat Mighty Inoue and Asako, and Malenko made Masao Inoue submit. May 28th in Fushimi drew a sellout 2,850 as Tsuruta and Tao and Ogawa beat Misawa and Kawada and Kikuchi in 30-27. Gordy and Williams beat Patriot and Smith. Kobashi pinned Fulton. Crawford and Furnace beat Slinger and Rogers. Wild Bunch beat Baba and Kimura and Izumida in the upset of the week in 21-12. Mighty Inoue pinned Nelson. Malenko drew Bobby Fulton over 20 minutes, and Momota pinned Masao Inoue. May 26th in Ishinomaki drew a sellout 3,350 as Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi beat Tsuruta and Tao and Ogawa in 28-07. Gordy and Williams beat Patriot and Jackie Fulton. Crawford and Furnace beat Slinger and Smith. Kikuchi pinned Bobby Fulton. Baba and Kimura and Izumida beat Wild Bunch in 22-04. Mighty Inoue upset Malenko. Rogers pinned Momota and Nelson pinned Asako. May 25th in Miyagi before a sellout 5,500 for television taping, which aired last Sunday and drew a 3.9 rating, saw Gordy and Williams and Slinger beat Tsuruta and Tao and Ogawa when Williams pinned Tsuruta in a big surprise with the Oklahoma Stampede in 25-51 4¼ star. Misawa and Kawada beat Patriot and Smith 3 stars. Kobashi and Kikuchi beat Crawford and Furnace to win the Asian Tag Team titles 5 stars. Rogers pinned Malenko in a battle of new tag team partners. Baba and Kimura and Izumida beat Wild Bunch in 22-56. Jackie Fulton pinned Nelson and Bobby Fulton pinned Asako. Nippon TV is running a Legends of All Japan special for 90 minutes this coming Saturday afternoon, airing Bruiser Brody vs. Jumbo Tsuruta from 1988, Giant Baba vs. Kentaro Oki from 1975, and Tiger Mask Misawa vs. Mil Mascaras from 1986. New Japan. Kensuke Sasaki returns on June 26 in Budokan Hall after being out 10 months with a broken leg in a singles match against former tag team partner Hiroshi Hazi. Takayuki Iizuka returned to action on May 25 after the Potato City match with the Steiners on May 17 in Jacksonville, and had what was said to have been one of the great matches of the year, teaming with Akira Nagami to upset Jushin Liger and Keiji Muto in 23:03. Unfortunately, this match wasn't taped for television. Most recent tour ended June 3 in Okayama before a sellout 4,650 fans as Muto and Masachono and Shiro Koshinaka beat Brad Armstrong and Brad Reingens and Tony Halme when Chono made Armstrong submit to the STF. Riki Chashu and Hiroshi Hazi beat Hiro Saito and Super Strong Mashi. Shinya Hashimoto pinned Rambo from Europe. Kengo Kimura upset Nagami. Iizuka and Liger and Kunyaki Kobayashi beat Pegasus Kid, Chris Benoit and Samurai Osamu Matsuda, and Norio Oniga when Kid did the job for Iizuka. Tony St. Clair pinned Koji Kanemoto, and Osamu Kido pinned Masanobu Karice. The biggest show of the past week was a television taping on June 2 at the Hiroshima Sun Plaza before a sellout 6,400 as Muto and Chono beat Chashu and Nagami when Muto pinned Nagami with a Frankensteiner in 1913. Hashimoto pinned Iizuka with a DDT in 1851. Armstrong and Halme beat Goto and Machine when Halme hit Goto with a KO punch and Goto did a stretcher job. Hazi pinned Rambo. Pegasus Kid and Samurai beat Liger and Tiger Mask, Koji Kanemoto, in what was said to have been a fantastic match. Koshinaka and Kobayashi beat Oniga and Saito, Kido pinned St. Clair and Kimura pinned Karisu. June 1 in Kitakyushu drew 2,270 as Machine and Saito and Goto beat Chashu and Nagami and Iizuka. Muto and Chono beat Halme and St. Clair, Hashimoto and Hazi beat Armstrong and Rambo, Iizuka and Pegasus Kid beat Liger and Kanemoto, and Black Cat and Koshinaka beat Samurai and Kid. Nagami and Iizuka may feud since they had The next major All Japan Women's show is July 15 in Tokyo's Ota Ward Gym, which traditionally is the second biggest show of the year with the exception of the WrestleMarine Piad. June 7 in Kushiro drew 2,600 as Hokuto pinned Yoshida and Kong and Kimura beat Yamada and Kyoko Inoue. June 6 in Abashiri drew 1,850 as Kong and Kimura and Kamiya beat Hokuto and Mita and Watanabe and Yoshida drew Takako Inoue. The two hold the Japanese tag team titles, over 30 minutes. June 1 in Aomori saw Kong and Kimura beat WWA and UWA tag champs Toyota and Yamada in a non-title match when Toyota did the job. Hasegawa pinned Malenko in a battle of regular tag partners. Hokuto and Mita and Yoshinaga beat Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue, and Yoshida and Hada and Manami beat Shimoda and Marine. FMW next tour is June 16 to June 28 with Sabu, The Sheik, Ed Farhat, and Horace Boulder, Mike Balia on the tour. The major shows on the tour on June 20 in Akita with a no-rope barbed wire match with Atsushi Onita and Samba Asako vs. Boulder and Snatcher, Tarzan Goto and Great Punk vs. Boulder, and Sabu and Sheik vs. Mr. Ganasuk. June 25 in Sapporo is Onita vs. Sheik in a no-rope barbed wire street fight death match, also billed as the final singles match ever between the two. Goto and Asako and Ganasuk vs. Snatcher and Sabu and Gladiator, Ricky Fuji and Punk vs. Boulder and African. And tour ends June 28 in Tokyo's Korakuen Hall with Onita and Asako and Ganasuk vs. Boulder and Snatcher and Gladiator in a street fight. Goto and Punk vs. Sabu and African and Sheik vs. Fuji. Joe Malenko starts with PWF in August. Akira Maeda had his knee scoped on May 28. Next ring show is June 25 with Maeda vs. by Tarzan Hall. Shows on June 13 have Dos Caras and Gran Hamada vs. Villanos 4 and V Kendo and Punish and Crush vs. Shuel Guerrero and Monkey Magic Wakita and Scorpio Jr. and Robin Hood and Pantera 2. The Work to Last tour here is America. And Cyclone Ramirez vs. Rambo and El Engendro and a newcomer named Sentan. June 14 has Caras and Kendo and Hamada vs. Rambo and Villanos, Robin Hood and Punish and Crush vs. Guerrero and Engendro and Scorpio Jr. plus UWF Super Welterweight Tournament with Ramirez vs. Wakita and Pantera 2 vs. Santana. June 15 in Korakuen has the UWF Super Welterweight Tournament Finals. Punish and Crush defend UWA Intercontinental Tag Team titles against Guerrero and Scorpio plus Caras and Hamada vs. Villanos. Final card on June 20th is Caras and Robin Hood and Hamada vs. Wakita and Villanos. Tour was weakened when Canelo Casas, Misterioso and Volador all cancelled. Nobuhiko Takada vs. Mark Silver, Kazuo Yamazaki vs. Steve Day, Yoji Angio vs. Masahito Kakihara and Kiyoshi Tamura and Yuko Miyato vs. Tatsuo Nakano and Mark Fleming. Next Wing Tour is July 17th to July 25th with WWC Universal Champion Carlitos Colon, Kevin Sullivan, Jason the Terrible, Eric Embry, The Masked Inferno from Puerto Rico, Leatherface, Lucifer, Steve Collins from Florida, and The Winger. The Foreigners will be involved in a Ring Surrounded by Fire tournament with the winner of the July tournament facing Kevin Sullivan on July 25th, and the winner of that faces Mr. Pogo for the Ring Surrounded by Fire Championship in August in Chiba. Current tour opened June 4th in Omiya before a sellout 1,878 as Jimmy Backlund and Gypsy Joe beat Super Invader and Pogo in a cage match which drew a sellout since Joe announced if his team lost, he'd retire from wrestling. After the match, Pogo attacked Joe Imura in a cage match and in round-robin matches to create the first Wing Junior Heavyweight Champion. Bill Dundee beat Cheetah Kid, Backlund beat Chaz Taylor and Masaru Toy beat Grand Sheik, Arias Romero. June 7th in Chiba drew 1,759 as Headhunters DDQ Jason and Gypsy Joe. Pogo beat Tokuda in a bunkhouse death match, and in tournament matches, Backlund pinned Dundee, Sheik pinned Taylor and Cheetah Kid pinned Toy. SWS drew 1,980 on June 5th at Korakuen Hall with basically a split show since George Takano's guys agreed to continue with the group until the end of this month. In Tenryu matches, Kabuki and King Haku beat Genichiro Tenryu and Ashura Hara. Takashi Ishikawa and Samson Fuyuki beat Tatsumi Kitahara and Tetsuya Yamanaka, and Ultimate Dragon, Yoshihiro Asai, beat Archangel de la Muerte. Takano group matches saw Kengo Nagasaki and Fumihiro and Goro Tsurumi pin Don Arakawa. George Takano's group is scheduled to start in August, with the tentative opening date on August 9th at Korakuen Hall. Ishinriki is again going to make an attempt to wrestle, coming out of retirement for Takano's group, starting August 9th. Japanese television rundown. May 24th, All Japan. 1. Kikuchi pinned Ogawa by reversing a rolling cradle. What aired looked great. 2. Williams pinned Patriot with a stampede. Patriot looked huge even next to Williams. They only aired clips but it looked fine. 3. Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi beat Tsuruta and Tao and Fuchi in an incredible match that went about 37 minutes. 5 stars. May 26th, SWS. 1. Chavo Guerrero pinned Hiroshi Hatanaka in 8:16 with a German suplex. No heat. 1 and 12:07 when Fuyuki made Kawabata submit to the Boston Crab. 1 and 3/4 stars. 3. Kabuki pinned Ishikawa in 11:17 with a back suplex. 1 star. 4. George and Shunji Takano beat Yoshiaki Yatsu and Kendo Nagasaki when George pinned Nagasaki in 13:08. 1 and 1/2 star. 5. Sano pinned Rick Martel to retain the SWS Junior Heavyweight title in 12:08 with a completely screwed up Thez press. Martel's mouth was busted open early. Match had little heat and these two didn't work together well at all, which there is no excuse for since they've worked many times before. Martel really looked washed up here and out of his league. 1/2 of 1 star. 6. Tenryu and Hara and Dragon beat Guerrero del Futuro and Berserker and Haku in 27:33. Some pretty stiff stuff with the big guys, although Futuro with a monkey suplex, German suplex into a Japanese rolling crotch hold, 2.5 stars. All in all, a terrible card for television. May 30th, New Japan. 1. Antonio Inoki and Hazi beat Brad Rheingans and Rambo in 13:54 when Inoki pinned Rheingans after 2 Enzoi Gyrus and a sleeper. It was fairly dull most of the way, but the finish was pretty exciting. 1 and 3/4 stars. 2. Chashu pinned Muto in 15:55 to keep the IWGP title. The first half of the match was mat work, but Muto sold Chashu's leg holds great. Chashu then hit the Saito suplex and Scorpion, but Muto got out of it. Finally, Muto made the comeback and did all of his signature moves, and it turned into a very good match. Highlights were the moonsault, a dive over the top rope onto the floor, the octopus submission, and a Frankensteiner. The tables turned when Muto went for the hit, but Muto thought it was going to be a DDT and sold it in a way where both guys looked like idiots. Then Chashu tried the DDT and Muto thought it was going to be another lariat, so he screwed it up again. Give them credit because neither hesitated for a second and put on a hot 45 seconds to end the match with Chashu hitting 2 lariats for the win. 3 stars 1/4. USWA. June 2nd in Louisville saw Jeff Daniels pin Kat Garrett thanks to interference of Daniels' valet Dominique Ferrari. Man of the 90s, Warren Bianchi, pinned Tony Falk due to outside help from valet Lauren Davenport. Candyman Reggie B. Fine, pinned Psycho, Moondog Spot and Cujo kept the USWA tag team titles, beating the Power Twins when Moondog Spike interfere. Southern champ Brian Christopher retained the title going to a double disqualification against Eric Embry when the Moondogs attacked Embry and Jeff Jarrett made the save. Jarrett beat Eddie Gilbert via DQ, so Gilbert retained Lawler with a chair and Spike pinned him, but a second ref came in and saw what happened and reversed the decision. June 6th in Nashville saw Davenport and Man of 90s beat Daniels and Ferrari. Spike pinned Victor Rivera, who had worked as Victor Rivera Jr. for the WWA in New Jersey. Christopher pinned Falk. Ron Oakes, who had worked as Thor for WWA and looks very much like Sting but sure doesn't wrestle like him as he's really green, pinned Psycho, Moondog Spot and Cujo DDQ. Jarrett and Embry and Lawler beat Gilbert via DQ in a title unification match when Burt Prentice, formerly Chris Love, interfered. On television Saturday, Richard Lee came out and said that Global, playing the role of heel promotion, asked the Moondogs to wrestle clean from this point forward. Moondogs are said to have signed with Global, so Lee said they'd wrestle clean, but that lasted until the bell rang for their squash match as they destroyed jobbers with boards and chairs again. Mike Samples came out as Global president once again, this time with a new past heel, and he and Lawler got into a big argument. Eddie Gilbert brought out an after mag and said that everyone was wrong in saying he was trying to be like Jerry Lawler, as the mag showed him rated number 6 in the world, and that Lawler wasn't even rated. June 12th is the annual Faces vs. Heels softball game in Memphis. There has been talk of Joe Pedicino and Bonnie Blackstone appearing on Memphis television as a part of the Global angle, but it may be just talk. June 8th card at the Mid-South Coliseum had Rivera vs. Psycho, Candyman vs. Daniels, Falk vs. Spike, Embry vs. Man of 90s, Christopher vs. Oakes for the Southern title, Moondogs vs. Jarrett and Pez Whatley for USWA tag titles, with Embry in Jarrett and Whatley's corner to prevent Spike and Lee from interfering, and Lawler vs. Gilbert in another title unification match. Smoky Mountain. Some weekend results. June 7th in Beckley, West Virginia saw Hector Guerrero pin Killer Kyle, Mark Kyle. Danny Davis over Brian Lee kept the SMW title, beating Tony Anthony via DQ and Heavenly Bodies. Tom Pritchard and Stan Lane, managed by Jim Cornette, kept the SMW tag team titles, beating the Batten Twins in a no DQ match. June 6th in Harlan, Kentucky saw Guerrero over Kazana, Dixie Dynamite. Scott Armstrong beat Mantell, Horner and Gibson beat Jimmy Golden and Landell. Lee pinned Anthony to keep the title, and Heavenly Bodies beat Johnny and Davey Rich. June 5th in Knoxville saw Dynamite beat Mantell, Anthony over Joey Maggs. Gibson beat Kyle, Landell beat Horner for the $5,000 Battle Royal money. Heavenly Bodies beat Johnny and Davey Rich, and Lee beat Paul Orndorff via DQ. June 4th in Tasnell, Virginia saw Gibson win a Battle Royal. Gibson and Horner beat Heavenly Bodies in a non-title match. Battens beat Golden and Mantell. Lee pinned Anthony. Guerrero beat Landell via DQ, and Dynamite pinned Kyle. Lineup for July 6th, Lee vs. Anthony, Horner vs. Landell, Gibson vs. Golden, and Dynamite vs. Kazana. Oregon. 2 shows this past week in Portland. On June 1st, they had a Monday night card in Portland, which was Sandy Barr's first show as promoter in the sports arena, so they would have something for the cable access television show. Even though ringside was $5 and GA was free, the crowd was still only around 100 for a pretty good main event as Ron and Don Harris beat Ryumako and Mikihito Takasugi, and the match was stopped because Takasugi was bleeding. The Japanese wrestled as babyfaces and were heavily cheered. Also, Colonel De Beers and John Rambo beat Steve Dahl and Brickhouse Brown when De Beers used a stun gun on Brown a la Slaughter in Mountie, and Brown did a stretcher job. Brown is said to have been injured and is out of action, but they are playing it like he's coming back at some point. The grappler who holds the Northwest Tag title with Dahl is no longer around, and no word as of the Rose Festival. As Rambo pinned Dahl using the tights, El Madril drew Mike Winner, Rambo pinned Bart Sawyer, Ron and Don Harris beat C.W. Bergstrom and Jesse Barr, and they also had 2 Sandy Barr trainees work a semi-pro match which even the most loyal fans had little tolerance for. In an attempt to get fans back, tickets have been lowered to $6, $4 and $2, but with no television except public access, which almost nobody even knows is on, let alone watches. They're still limited to the hardcore weekly regulars, so they'd have been better off keeping the old prices, which were $2 higher across the board. Last week we reported that Sandy Barr was negotiating with CH32 in Portland, but that is simply the public access station that they are already on. With the Japanese gone on Saturday, the style was not Japanese-oriented. Next week has Dahl vs. Ron Harris and Sawyer vs. Rambo. Al Madril and Don Koss do the play-by-play and are trying to sell it as a new, improved, and both the WWC and competing AWF ran major shows on June 6th in the San Juan area. WWC on June 6th in Bayamon saw Cyclone Salvadorino and Rockin' Rebel beat El Exotico and Randy Rhodes. Rex King pinned Heartbreaker Adonis. Frankie Lancaster, Sasha beat La Tigresa in a women's street fight. El Bronco No. 1 beat Abdullah Hussein. Lou Fabiano, Canadian Giant DDQ Abdullah the Butch. Dick Murdoch double count out with PN News, so Murdoch retained the WWC TV title. Fidel Sierra beat Lale via DQ. Ron Starr and Doug Masters retained the WWC Tag Team titles, going to a double count-out with the Renegade Warriors, Mark and Chris Youngblood. And Carlitos Colon retained the WWC title, pinning Invader No. 1, Jose Gonzalez, now a full-fledged heel, in a no-DQ match. The same night, the AWF ran its biggest card-to-date build as the event, with Hercules Ayala vs. Crash the Eliminator in a bar. America's title in a ring surrounded by fire. Steve Strong, Steve DeSalve, versus the Barbarian, formerly of WWF, tag team title, with the losers having to be taken out in an ambulance, with Ray Gonzalez and Tom Brandy versus Solid Gold, Jose and Julio Estrada, Chris Adams versus Tony Atlas for the North American title, Barabas versus Chiquista, Butch Reed versus Manny Fernandez, television announcer Hugo Savinovich versus Billy Joe Travis, Invader No. 4, Maelo Huertas versus The Wizard, Gino Paoli versus Galan Mendoza in a coal miner's glove match, Super Medico No. 4 versus Drive Terror in a loser of the match must retire match, and Jose Luis Rivera versus King Ka. June 7th in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico saw Salvadorino and Rebel beat Rhodes, and Exotico, Louisiana lay pinned Adonis. King beat Hussein via DQ, News beat Murdoch via countout, so Murdoch kept the TV title. Colon pinned Invader No. 1. Bronco No. 1 beat Sierra via DQ, and Star and Masters double countout with Renegade Warrior. Here and there. Global Wrestling Federation on June 5th at the Dallas Sportatorium drew 198 paid since kids were free, as Bill Irwin DDQ Johnny Mantel. Beach Boy and Beach Bully Sean Summers and Stacy Porto beat Ed Robinson and Chris Germany. Tugboat Taylor and Rod Price and John Tatum beat Gary Young and Stephen Dane and Skander Akbar, which ended up with Tatum and Akbar as the last. So Young and Dane interfered for the DQ. Mantel DDQ Iceman King Parsons when Irwin interfered and attacked Mantel. Tatum and Price beat Ed Robinson and El Gran Colosso. Scott Putski pinned Dane. Irwin and Tribal Nation, Chris and Mark Youngblood, beat Beach Boy and Beach Bully and Maniac Mike Davis. Putski pinned Colosso. Parsons pinned Germany. Terry Sims pinned Beach Boy, and Dane and Young kept the GWF tag titles, going to a double countout with Tribal Nation. Apparently promoter Max Andrews gave the troops a pre-show pep talk, telling them not to worry about the small crowds because television ratings are at an all-time high. The past 2 weeks on ESPN the show drew in 0.6 average, which is not an all-time high by any means. Andrews has a contract with ESPN to provide them with their afternoon television wrestling product through the end of this year. My guess is that at that point, several promoters will approach ESPN about trying to get the slot. Only match announced for June 12th is Dane and Young defending against Tribal Nation. Big D Pro Wrestling drew 132 fans on June 7th in Dallas with a series of 2 of 3 fall matches in a tournament to create the Big D tag team titles, as Tatum and Price beat Jimmy James and Hurricane Mike. The Blackbirds, Parsons and Action Jackson, beat Dane and Yen. Sean Stevens and Beach Boy, Sean Summers, beat Ray Evans and the Animal in Straight Falls, and Big D kept the light heavyweight title, pinning Animal. The remainder of the tag team tournament takes place this coming Sunday. Burt Prentice is running in Dallas on June 19th with Patriot vs. Billy Travis. A wealthy Dallas individual is getting married on July 4th and asked King Parsons to book him 2 5-match wrestling shows, and Parsons was able to book Travis, Chris Adams, Tim Brooks, Skip Young, Dane, Gary Young, Tatum, Price, Parsons, Jackson, Mantel and others to appear. Buck Robley's promotion in Louisiana reopened June 9th with a television taping. Both Marty Jannetty and Makan Singh Mike Shaw no-showed the WFWA television taping on May 31st in Winnipeg, which was headlined by Chi Chi Cruz winning the Canadian title from Jerry Morrow. Bob and Kerry Brown interfered in the match, causing Morrow to lose, so both Browns are faces in WFWA. Larry Sharp is moving to Florida and going to start up an independent group on CH38 in Tampa at 10 a.m. starting at the end of this month. Sharp negotiated with Iqua to take over the promotion and use the television, but things fell apart over the past week, and Sharp instead is going to promote it as the southern branch of WWA and wants to feud wrestlers from the New Jersey area that he trained with the Florida wrestlers. He is going to train with each group, working as faces in their home area and heels in the other area. Spider, Glenn Ruth, is going to get the first shot at being head trainer at the original Monster Factory in New Jersey. John Arezzi is planning on promoting his 3rd annual Weekend of Champions Wrestling Convention on August 29th to 30th at the Ramada Inn at LaGuardia Airport. We should have a list of the names confirmed as appearing starting in the next week or 2. Bam Bam Bigelow and Ken Patera are on a wrestling tour of the Soviet Union. Eddie Mansfield's IWF drew 100 on June 6th, don't know the city but obviously in Florida, as Blackjack Mulligan pinned the possessor, Ned Brady. To keep the IWF title, Long Riders beat Nuclear Assassins to keep IWF tag title, and Firecat, Brady Boone, pinned Denny Brow. Mansfield says the IWF will continue to run about 9 shows per month and that nobody has quit the promotion. Mansfield has eliminated putting wrestlers under contracts, most of which just recently expired. Update on the prison records of boxers who are dabbling in wrestling. Trevor Berbick was sentenced to 3 years in prison on the rape charge he was recently convicted of, while Leon Spinks was sentenced to probation for another in a long series of driving miscues. Saw Onita vs. Spinks on Japanese TV and it was pretty bad. West Coast Wrestling Association on June 6 in Abbotsford, BC saw Jimmy Snuka beat Colonel De Beers and Michelle Starr, promoter Mark Velios, and Buddy Rose beat Mighty Quinn and Timothy Flowers. Previous night in Cloverdale, BC saw Starr beat Moose Morovsky and Flowers and Snuka over Rose and De Beers. A benefit show on May 29 in Marietta, Georgia drew 400 as Junkyard Dog, DDQ Night Stalker, Brian Clark, Sugar Ray Lloyd and Chris Blade and Steve Day, who works for UWFI in Japan and was actually not a member of the 1980 U.S. Olympic team but went to the trials as a 220-pounder in Greco-Roman and was beaten out for the slot by Brad Rangan, beat the PYTs, Jim Bryant and Fred Avery, and Ronnie P. Gossett. Bambi beat Peggy Lee Leather and Steve Lawler pinned the Nightmare, Ted Allen. Rob Bruson promoted an IWA show on May 30 in Elwood City, Pennsylvania before 400 as Shane Douglas and Preston Steele beat Stan Lane, and Big Cheese. Lane won a blindfold battle royal. Charlie Fulton beat Thunderfoot No. 1, Thunderfoot No. 2 beat T.C. Reynolds and Ron Cumberledge pinned Scott Summer. WWA promoted Lucha Libre June 4 in Reseda, California before just over 100 fans as Superstar Jr. beat Mondo Guerrero via DQ. Mercenaries, Billy Anderson and Tim Patterson, and Genghis Khan beat Ultraman 2000, Amigo Ultra, and Loverboy and Bull Raider. Rey Mysterio via DQ, which is building to Anderson vs. Ultraman in a barbed wire match. Former UCLA and Denver Nuggets basketball player Brad Wright got into a shouting altercation angle with Budokan Eddie Carter, which ended with a pull-apart. Since Wright can speak Spanish, he got over huge with the crowd. South Atlantic Pro Wrestling ran a show in Ainer, South Carolina on June 6 with Bambi over Peggy Lee Leather, the Ringlords keeping the SAP Tag titles beating Wahoo McDaniel and the Jetlag Patriot via DQ, and Patriot won a battle royal. Bob Raskin ran on May 22 in Asbury Park, New Jersey before 962 fans as Misty Blue beat Cat La Rue. Larry Winters and Al the Sledgehammer beat DC Drake and Boy Gone Bad. Joe Daniels, Cheetah Kid pinned King Kala and Bam Bam Bigelow pinned Nikolai Volka. Southland Championship Wrestling on June 13 in Lawrenceville, Georgia has Bruce Force vs. the Blazers on top. Jalisco Promotions in Los Angeles on June 7 saw Los Verdugos and Gory Chavez beat Piloto Nuclear and Coloman and Torito. Torito laid down in the third fall and will join Los Verdugos as a heel trio to do a Guatemala vs. Mexico feud. Rick Sadist and Thunder Machine and Vandal Drummond, Kurt Brown, beat Greg Regalado and Gemini Kid in Electric Youth, David Hanna, when Regalado turned heel causing Gemini to do a stretcher job. ICW on June 6 in Lima, Ohio saw the Nightmares win the ICW tag titles from the Wild Bunch, Al Snow and Mike Kelly in an explosive match when Kelly was pinned after being hit by Gideon Wainwright's Chris Zavisa briefcase. Faced his setup on June 19, Wild Bunch and Taffy vs. Nightmares and Wainwright. WCW. Jim Ross was hired on Friday as the new color commentator for the Atlanta Falcons for the upcoming season. Ross, who will retain all his present administrative and announcing duties with WCW, will do both the pregame and postgame shows, postgame being a call-in show, along with being the third man in the booth during the games. The Falcons radio network flagship station is WSB, and Ross Wrestling Talk Show is the highest-rated talk show on the station, which probably is part of the reason he got the job. It's usually very hard for someone so well known as a wrestling announcer, no matter how good they may be at announcing, to get a break with legit sports because of how wrestling and everyone involved in wrestling is often perceived. So it really is a feather in Ross' cap to pull this one off. Center Stage taping on June 2nd, air date June 27th with Michael and That Larry Needs Your Support. Super Invader has a squash match that I'm told shouldn't air, but if it does, Chris Sullivan was the opponent, it'll make a decent blooper tape. Invader and manager Harley Red Fox Race talked about upcoming tag matches with Invader and Big Van Vader vs. Sting and Ron Simmons. Dustin Rhodes beat Terrence Taylor via DQ 2 3/4 stars with Greg Valentine doing the run-in and Ron Simmons making the save. Valentine beat Mike Graham Dud. Tracy Smothers and Richard Morton and Buddy Lee Parker beat Brian Pillman and Tom Zank and Johnny B. Bad via DQ when Pillman was DQ'd for coming off the top rope, which caused a major argument with ref Old Bronco Lubick Anderson 2 3/4 stars. The fans reacted to Anderson King Pillman as if he'd turned heel. Also Arnold Anderson pinned Marcus Bagwell 1 1/2 star, and they talked about Sting vs. Arnold Anderson at the Omni on July 5th in a non-title match, 2 stars. Sam Houston was at the Omni trying to get a job on June 7th. Abdullah the Butcher was at the Omni trying and succeeding in losing a job the same night. Abdullah was asked to put Dustin Rhodes over clean and he made a fuss about not being treated right and quit on the spot. Since Abdullah has another Japan tour booked for the month of July and is headlining in Puerto Rico, it's not like he had any dates booked in the first place or was actually planning on sticking around. Almost all discussion of Jake Roberts has evaporated. If he is coming in, which may or may not be the case, he isn't scheduled for house shows as far advance as has been booked, which is through the end of July. David Crockett has quit the company. Television shoots scheduled for June 5th in Rock Hill, South Carolina and June 8th in Dothan, Alabama were scrapped since they wouldn't air until the end of the month. It would give away angles that will be shot at the Clash and/or pay-per-view show for one thing, and June 26th in Topeka, and the next center stage is June 29th. Did you see that a notable non-WCW non-wrestling celebrity made the cover of TV Guide last week, Jason Hervey? The television tapings this past Monday and Tuesday, while nothing extra special when it came to work rate, were the most organized that they've been. No California shows are scheduled in the foreseeable future. The July date in Los Angeles was canceled, and there was some heat with the Forum over the cancellation since they asked WCW to get the ring they were storing at the Forum out of the building. It appears they are going to target certain cities that have the best television ratings and run them more frequently and stay out of cities that don't have strong television outlets. In those cities they are going to run angles at the house shows to lead to the next shows and talk in the localized magazine segments about events that happened on the previous and will happen on the following house shows to build local storylines. Liger, after the June 16th Clash, will return from July 4th to July 12th with matches in all the cities run during that week against Scotty Flamingo, Baltimore July 4th, Brad Armstrong, Raleigh, Norfolk and Richmond, and Johnny B. Bad, Omni July 5th. Ratings for last weekend saw main event on May 31st to a 2.3 for the 2-hour special. WCW on May 30th with a Zbyszko breakup with Dangerously and Muta vs. Armstrong did a 2.2 and Power Hour did a 1.8, which aren't embarrassing compared with recent weeks but still nothing to brag about. June 7th at the Omni in Atlanta drew 2,600 with Ron Simmons winning the Battle Royal, and the first 8 eliminated were to not work the undercard and the remainder were to work in pairings, 9 vs 10, 11 vs 12, etc. Minor screw-up as apparently Rick Steiner was supposed to go out before Barry Windham and he didn't, but Windham still worked the undercard even though Windham went out number 8 and Big Josh 1 star. Invader pinned Jimmy Garvin dud, Rhodes pinned Bobby Eaton when Eaton was on the top rope, still legal until TV airs on Saturday, and Zbyszko shoved him off 1 1/2 star. Eaton is doing better and can work passably but not at 100%. Scott Steiner pinned Great Muta 3 stars. Nikita Koloff pinned Vinny Vegas 1/2 of 1 star. In a title can change hands via DQ match, Rick Rude pinned Rick Steamboat when Steamboat had Medusa pressed overhead and Rude clipped him from behind, and Rude pinned Steamboat with Medusa on top as well in 21 minutes, 4 stars. Simmons pinned Anderson in 5 minutes. Rhetorical question: why? If Anderson is going to headline the next Omni show against Sting, does he get pinned cleanly by Simmons? And Sting pinned Steve Austin 2.5 stars. Good match but Rude and Steamboat couldn't be followed. July 5th at the Omni has Sting vs. Anderson, Valentine, Liger vs. Bad, Flamingo vs. Armstrong and Zbyszko vs. Eaton. Steamboat's contract expires at the end of the month but haven't heard any concern that the two sides aren't going to be able to reach a deal. The Freebirds are working against Steve Williams and Terry Gordy in non-title matches at the end of the month, which has Hayes vs. Gordy, which should be exploited on interviews because of the historical perspective. Williams and Gordy also have tag matches against Sting and Pillman. Advance for the June 20th Beach Blast in Mobile, Alabama is pretty weak with approximately 900 tickets sold less than 2 weeks before showtime. Only early line predictions are that the company will be happy with the buy rate if it stays steady with the last one, and that Steamboat and Rude may tear the house down in the main event. June 8th in Dothan, Alabama drew a sellout 3,200 as Valentine pinned Josh, Invader destroyed Bagwell, Rhodes and Koloff beat Graham and Jack, and after the match Jack turned on Graham, title bell. WWF Depositions in the Murray Hodgson case are scheduled starting June 18th. As of press time, both sides will be allowed to videotape the other's deposition, but will not be allowed to distribute edited or unedited portions to the press. The actual written depositions are still scheduled to be public record as soon as they are filed, which many are thinking could have some interesting items revealed. Negotiations were supposed to take place over this past weekend, no word on how they went, involving Bob Backlund, believe it or not. Sid Justice has claimed that the reason he left was because during the finish of his matches with Ultimate Warrior, one of the spots would have Warrior kicking out of the power bomb and Justice didn't want him kicking out of his big move, so he quit. Justice was going to leave by July anyway, as he either was about to give notice or already had. Love that voice of Nails, Kevin Wakehalls. I'll bet some fans thought it was Steve Austin with a voice distortion. Injuries would be career-ending, so he probably won't be back until SummerSlam. If only he liked softball, it would be perfect timing. Ric Flair missed all 3 television tapings last week because one daughter had a piano recital during the week and another daughter graduated high school. Elizabeth was never mentioned on television this past week. If Randy Savage doesn't mention her during the interview that airs this weekend as a send-off to explain why she won't be back, then she'll simply never be mentioned again and nothing will be explained. I'd expect them to try and run an angle. They are shooting videos of Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, in Florida. Crowds in the cities they regularly run in are way below par, but in the cities they go to maybe once a year, the crowds are okay, although those are generally smaller cities. This means the most casual audience isn't being turned off by the current angles as much as the most loyal audience. Don't know what the story on Roddy Piper being gone realizes that almost nobody has even noticed. In years past when he left it was sure a much bigger deal. June 6th in Boston drew 4,500 as Jim Powers pinned Brooklyn Brawler 1 1/2 star, Mountie beat Sergeant Slaughter via countout 3/4 of a star. Nails beat Virgil via submission 1/2 of 1 star. Savage beat Flair via a reverse decision DQ and Flair got the pin after Mr. Perfect gave him a foreign object in 1547, but road agent Dave Heckner told ref Earl Heckner what happened and the decision was reversed 3 1/2 stars. Tito Santana pinned Kato Dud, Undertaker pinned Berserker 2 stars, and Legion of Doom beat Beverly Brothers 1 1/2 star. A Utica, New York television station is doing a special on Lee Cole and 2 major magazine stories are in the works. There was pretty much a disaster regarding the Fort Wayne, Indiana show on June 4th. First off, the promos one week ran the Savage Flair card and undercard when it was supposed to be the Warrior Shango crew. There were all sorts of confusion and mishaps regarding other publicity, and then when the card came, both Warrior and Kerry Von Erich no-showed for inexplicable reasons. In a display of fairness to the audience never seen before in recent wrestling history, the WWF is offering refunds to all of whom attended since they expected Warrior there and never made an announcement and offered refunds earlier in the night. This brings up an important point. If you see screw-ups in some way, shape or form in the local advertising with either group, it's probably a good idea to contact the promotions office because the odds are they don't know about it and would like to, because these national companies don't have people in every town who watch the television closely for screw-ups and they really do want to correct errors such as that. June 6th in Omaha drew 3,700 as Von Erich pinned Barry Horowitz, subbing for Colonel Mustafa, who has been fired. Crush pinned Skinner, Repo Man pinned Jim Duggan, Tatanka beat Rick Martel via DQ, Earthquake pinned IRS. Scheduled as the tag, I believe Typhoon is fairly seriously Bret Hart pinned Shawn Michaels and Warrior pinned Shango. Same crew in Chicago on June 5th drew 2,500, which is about the smallest WWF crowd in Chicago I've ever heard of. The jury declared the men involved in the incident in Peoria, Illinois in January with the Nasty Boys guilty. The 3 men were each found guilty of 4 counts of aggravated battery and 2 counts of mob action. Both articles concentrated on Savage's baseball career in high school and the minor leagues. Phil Mushnick of the New York Post ran a short item in his column on June 3. The New York State Athletic Commission, which sanctions the scandal-soaked World Wrestling Federation, has not, despite urging and ample evidence, investigated any of the illegal sex and drug charges leveled against Vince McMahon and company. And new charges surface virtually every day. The commission has not urged the state attorney general to investigate, either. Why does the WWF get a pass from New York State? Money. The commission receives 5.5% of the WWF's and state gate receipts. And unless Commissioner Randy Gordon comes up with a better reason for giving the WWF a look-away pass, that's the only reason that makes any sense. Maitre can't use Mountie gimmick in Canada, beat Slaughter via count out. Tatanka pinned Bob Bradley. Von Erich pinned Skinner. Earthquake pinned Ted DiBiase. Undertaker pinned Berserk. Excellent match, and Savage beat Flair via a reversed decision DQ, same finish as everywhere else. June 7th in Dayton, Ohio drew 2,800 as Von Erich pinned Horowitz, Earthquake pinned IRS, Crush beat Skinner, Bret Hart pinned Michaels, Repo Man pinned Duggan, Tatanka beat Martel via DQ and Warrior pinned Shango. TV ratings saw Primetime do a week 2.0 on June 8th, All-American on June 7th did a 2.4 which is its best in a while, and Body Stars did another 0.6 on June 6th. The readers' pages. Roy Lucier of 14,322 Harrington's Yamada and house show tapes from Boston Garden, Madison Square Garden, and Los Angeles. Frank Strom of 81 Sargent Street, Revere, Massachusetts 02151 is looking for the Observer issue on Bruiser Brody, and is looking to hear from any Brody fans that would be willing to contribute to a Brody tribute issue of parts unknown, either recollections, a tribute artwork, photos, etc. Tim Knoll of P.O. Box 5202, James Madison University, Harrisonburg, Virginia 22807 is looking for tapes of the 2 out of 3 fall Eddie Gilbert vs. Cactus Jack match from Philadelphia, the Gilbert vs. Jack barbed wire match from Philadelphia, the Flair vs. Tenryu SWS match, and a regular supplier of Smoky Mountain videotape. Louis Wolfson of 3820 Nostrams pre 1980. In his return, his old observers, magazines, and a large collection of tapes to trade include customized tapes from Japan. Scott Wallace of 11 Bonnie Lane, Billerica, Massachusetts 01821 is looking for the results of the March 28 card at the Boston Garden. Mike McKenna of 2087 Biltmore Point, Longwood, Florida 32779 is looking for someone who can supply him with New Japan and FMW tapes. Roy Berger of the Wichita Greyhound Park in Kansas will swap choice tickets to the October 13th Garth Brooks concert at Kansas Coliseum for wrestling memorabilia of comparable value. Call or write care of the track at 1500 E. 77th St. North, Box 277, Valley Center, Kansas 67147. To attend and watch Beach Blast pay-per-view on June 20th. The number is 510-944-0967. Kelly Crow of 6947 Coal Creek Parkway SE number 164, Renton, Washington 98059 is looking for a tape of Johnny Carson's last show and a tape of the Stan Lane vs. Bill Mulkey match from Belton, South Carolina. Jim Melby of 1018 E. Rose, St. Paul, Minnesota 55106 has a number of wrestling magazines from the 50s and 60s for sale, and a large quantity of Japanese magazines for sale. Send us ace for his list. Chris Body of 87 Heartland Avenue, Emerson, New Jersey 07630 is looking for NWA shows on TBS from 1985 to 1989 and NBA games from the Knicks Pistons. 793 is looking for weekly tapes of Smoky Mountain, USWA, WWC, SWS and All Japan, plus a tape of the May 16th FMW card in Los Angeles, and is looking to correspond with fans of Tracy Lord. Mike Rogers of 2740 SE Llewellyn, Troutdale, Oregon 97060 is selling computerized wrestling results from the past for $1. Renee Johnson of 726 Manor Street, York, Pennsylvania 17403 is looking for videos of old NWA shows with Four Horsemen matches and angles up through 1989. CJ Poulos of 138 Lansdowne CT, Lansdowne, Pennsylvania 19050 is looking to get in touch with anyone who knows the whereabouts of ex-Philadelphia LA Angel or anyone who has photo. Highway 126 number 1, Redmond, Oregon 97756 is looking for a tape of the Donahue Show. Sweet Daddy Siki and Ron Hutchison conduct their pro wrestling school out of Sully's Gym in Toronto, and for more information contact them at P.O. Box 22523, 300 Coxwell Avenue, Toronto, ONTM 4L3W7. Dan Goss of P.O. Box 156, Torbay, NF A083Z0 Canada is looking for a regular supplier of WCW, SMW, All Japan Women, All Japan and New Japan videos and has a lot of All Japan Women tapes to trade for an exchange. Troy Hana 4329 Dresser Drive, Yuba City, California 95995 is looking for old tapes of Stampede Wrestling from 1971 Plaza del Amo number 114, Torrance, California 90503 is looking for a tape of the May 16th FMW card in Los Angeles. Daniel Brown of 7851 Teasdale Avenue, North Hollywood, California 91605 wants to hear from anyone who has Infocom computer games for either Apple or IBM computers. He can buy them or trade wrestling videos for them. UWFI. I'm again contacting you on behalf of the UWF International. You write that Hachiro Tanaka, SWS/Megames Super, owns a percentage of the UWFI. This is untrue. He has absolutely no ownership or other financial position in the UWFI. Your interpretation of the Warring Burbick matches continues to miss money. All he had to do was say he wouldn't fight with kicks and we'd have happily canceled his contract. We had a backup fighter ready and willing to go. At the May 8th Yokohama Arena promotion, former sumo champ Koji Kiao code Kazuo Yamazaki with a series of low kicks, not a kick to the face. Gary Albright will not be out of action until August due to injuries suffered in his fight. In fact, he will be on the card in Hakata on June 28. Gene Pelk. UWF International. Tokyo, Japan. Wrestling scandals. Something doesn't make sense here. How much power did Pat Patterson wield at Titan Sports? Are we to believe that Pat Patterson satisfied his lustful urges while Vince McMahon looked the other way? Did Patterson have the power to get announcers' axe to grind? We are all making a huge mistake by throwing all the accusations into one pot and mixing it up. Let's look at things separately. 1. Billy Graham. By the time he got to the WWF, he was a top star making a decent buck. Other than greed, why did he take steroids? He could have stayed with the AWA or NWA. How much pressure could the WWF have exerted on him? 2. Bruno Sammartino. He is so filled with hate that his credibility has to be questioned. If Titan was such an evil organization, why did he announce for them, and why did his son wrestle for them? What caused his dismissal from Titan and his venomous attitude? 3. Barry Orton. Did he write Titan a letter after he got out of jail asking for a job? If Vince McMahon has the foul, why isn't Barry Orton working with another organization? If he is as good as he thinks he is, he should be headlining against Sting in WCW. The list goes on. Thrown together it seems powerful. Dissecting it and you have a different picture. Titan isn't guilt-free, but these guys all came forward after they were out of the organization. They are not the pillars of the business you make them out to be. 10 guys ganging up together on Vince McMahon doesn't make them right. Pete Sekelarak. Round Lake Beach, Illinois. Response from Dave Meltzer. Pat Patterson was the vice president of operations at Titan Sports. Along with Vince McMahon, he decided who won, who lost, who got booked for how many dates in what spot on the card and in what cities. In the case of interchangeable mid-level and lower, I don't know how much power he had in regards to announcers, although any suggestions he made in that regard would have probably carried a decent amount of weight. This is not to say he was guilty of abusing that power for what has been alleged, but he definitely wielded power that could make or break all but the most marketable names and any incidental employees. Billy Graham took steroids because in powerlifting, bodybuilding, and pro wrestling, they were beneficial to his success. In conjunction with dedicated weight training, steroids allowed him to look the way he wanted to look. He didn't know what the long term would bring. Now that he knows what the long term did bring, he has a different attitude toward the drug. I venture to guess most who were to go through similar physical trauma would change their minds about the long-term value of the drugs. When you consider that by almost every estimate, public, approximately 0.4%, any other contact sports, even at its peak the NFL was probably never more than 40%, or any other wrestling group, you have to figure the amount of psychological pressure an organization can put on someone to do it is plenty. Either that or the WWF was specific about the type of psychological makeup and physical look they wanted to hire, which created the 90% figure. Because Graham himself probably would have used steroids whether he was in the WWF or another federation may be a valid point in the WWF's defense in regard to Graham's personal lawsuit. It is not a valid defense of what was going on in the WWF during that time period. Sammartino quit the WWF in 1988 and, as has been written before, his general feelings on the WWF and business in general today are consistent with what Orton has admitted many times, writing McMahon a letter after he got out of jail. Orton admitted it on Larry King. McMahon claimed it was from jail on the show as a way to point out Orton's served time in jail. Orton worked for the organization for about 6 months after he was out of jail. I'm not sure how that blows him out of the water, but if that's all the evidence you need to blow him out, you've got your evidence and he's blown out. But if you don't think plenty of people take jobs in corporations they think are hellholes or even really nice environments, but that they may know of illegal or immoral activities involved because either the money is so good, or because they feel they have no alternative, then you are kidding yourself. I don't know of anyone who has stated or even hinted any of these men are pillars of anything. The only thing is, most of what has been said publicly is nothing different or inconsistent with what many others have. Colleagues or not wanting to be blackballed out of the profession, blackballed in this case not meaning that all promoters jointly agree in a meeting not to use them, but basically gain a reputation so that the few powerful promoters and bookers independently decide not to use them because they gave the business bad publicity for speaking out, never went public to say it. Maybe a better example rather than using these specific individuals should be when Irv Mushnick, in preparing the People magazine article on Hulk Hogan, went through his phone list of ex-WWF wrestlers and a few ex-AWA wrestlers in regard to Hogan personally from that time period, and while there were some who didn't want to speak about these subject, of those who did, every one of them corroborated Graham's basic story about steroid use in the WWF being encouraged by management and use of many drugs as being prevalent. All either personally verified about using excessive doses in the dressing room. Not one wrestler, and these were names called at random with no prior knowledge as to how most of them would react, and I personally was shocked, as was Vince McMahon, I should add, at who and how many willingly came forward to say what they did, denied Graham's basic story. Most didn't want to go public with the story because they still were involved in the business in some fashion, didn't want to hurt the business, were friends with Terry Bollea, and there were friends of Bollea's like Bill Eadie who confirmed Graham's statements and many others who confirmed them but didn't want their name attributed to or had desires to return to the business. But even those who claimed to be Bollea's friends didn't deny Graham's story. Of all the wrestlers I've dealt with when the subject comes up, and there are dozens, while many are mad at Graham, Orton, David Schultz and Billy Jack Haynes, nobody denies the basic point. Those being steroid use was prevalent and that in some fashion sexual misconduct has been a part of the business. Since most active wrestlers are or have been steroid users, many rationalize reasons for it. Some are pretty valid and others aren't so valid. I've talked with wrestlers who don't concur with Orton's viewpoint about what the WWF dressing room was like during the period he was there, but others have stated for years what Orton went public and said was common knowledge to be what was going on. If it was just the word of 3 or 4 people or even 10 people, coming out of nowhere saying things that nobody had ever said and heard before with no evidence, it would be one thing. But that isn't the case. As it is, I'm ambivalent on some aspects of the sexual harassment stories, quite skeptical of others, and convicting these matters. Titan only made its defense less credible by having Vince McMahon go on Larry King and Phil Donahue and state so many things that have turned out to be either misleading or blatantly untrue. Bill Watts. The news about Bill Watts coming in as vice president is really great. I just hope people don't get the wrong idea and think he'll be the greatest vice president since sliced bread. He's only human and he could fail. That's why I'm not keeping my spirits too high about this. If he does pull WCW out of the hole, he'll complete a totally remarkable feat. Daryl Dickens. Asheboro, North Carolina. 5 days after enjoying everything that's great about pro wrestling at the FMW card in Los Angeles, I had the misfortune of sitting through the May 21st WCW show at the Forum. Bill Watts had better be close to chart. He has a zero base to build on. Bob Barnett. Santa Monica, California. In the mid-1980s, when Bill Watts was running Mid-South Wrestling in Houston with the late Paul Bosch, I had the opportunity to work very closely with Watts on his television show. His standards in broadcasting the matches were unequaled by any other promotion. He was one of the innovators in making music videos and producing television in which all the booking made sense. As one of the local editors of the show on KHTV, CH39 with Bosch, I saw the quality of the show get better and better each week. I spent several days in the Mid-South office with Joel Watts and Jim Ross and saw them develop some of the concepts in wrestling television that are used today. If Watts can turn around a promotion and improve the television product, then he is the man. And Ed Worthington need to join him at TBS. These two were primarily responsible for the mid-1980s television shows. They took squash matches and put them together to make them look like 3-star matches. WCW already has the best announcers. Bring back the high-tech music videos and most of all, bring back the angles that look more realistic. For all this to work, Watts is going to have to get the wrestlers' work rate up to mid-1980s standards. Yes, times have changed, but the basic product needs to be solid and believable. Those two items have been missing in WCW for a long time. Watts has a long and difficult road ahead. Al Tyner. Houston, Texas. UCW. I'm somewhat concerned about the lack of coverage the UCW receives in the Observer. Opposed to the WWF and WCW product. Our matches feature top-shelf wrestlers like Bill Wilcox, Freight Train Fulton, Scott Sharkey, Steve Ramsey, etc. We push wrestlers based on their wrestling ability and charisma, not bodybuilders or buddies of the booker. I'm not asking that we be the top story every week, or even get a heading like Global and USWA, but if you could give our results and more importantly, our return dates, it would mean a lot to everyone involved with the group. Remember, the fans in this area use the Observer as a tool to stay informed on the events happening in this area. Let them know we have great cards every other week. John McAdam. President UCW. Guys, hope you are all well. I'm reading the June 15, 1992 Observer newsletter.